If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, hikers/people who live in the Appalachian Mountains, what was the scariest experience/encounter you had in them haunted woods? Creatures, strange things, orbs, eerie trails, etc. I live on a 400+ acre farm in the Appalachians in Kentucky, and this happened to me yesterday. I got off of school and I was really bored, so I decided to go on a few-hour hike. And halfway, about a mile from my house and 5 from any others, I realized the forest was dead quiet. So I figured there was maybe a predator around, but I wasn't worried about it. So I kept walking. My goal was to get to what my grandma called goat rocks. They were huge rocks with writing on them, but just a few minutes later, I noticed they reeked of sulfur, and I couldn't see anything dead. Then I started to turn around because it stinks to high heaven, and I had this feeling of complete dread. Then I heard this sort of breathing, then a loud kind of yelp, and then footsteps, not mine. I was too scared to look back, and my brain was telling me my gun wasn't going to kill it. Once, I was with a girl on Big Frog Mountain at dusk, miles away from anyone. We decided to walk up a trail when, right behind the car, I stepped into a mud puddle with odd-looking light brownish water. I pointed out the unusual color to her, and then we started walking. Not far up the trail, she started getting scared, and we went back to the car. In the car, we started making out while lying in the front seat, and she had her hand draped out the window. I felt an odd sensation in my back. It had happened before when people were behind me, and told her to pull her hand in, which she did. A few minutes later, I felt the sensation in my back again, but it felt more urgent. I rolled her window up, but being a horny teenager, I continued with the makeout session. A few minutes later, it felt like someone had stuck a live wire in my back. I sat up, started the car, and headed back down the mountain. She was obviously confused and asked me what was wrong. I replied that I didn't know, but something was wrong somewhere. We went back to my parents' house and were assured by them that the family was okay. Having calmed down some, we ate a little dinner, then started to leave. After I opened the car door for her, I walked around the back of the car. While walking, I glanced at the back of the car and saw handprints the same color as the mysterious mud puddle on the car. The last one was over the back window, and it was obvious someone was watching us while inching their way to the front driver's side window. When I saw the handprints, it was like being hit with a lightning bolt, and I knew what had happened. Cold chills ran all over me. I got her out of the car, and as soon as she saw the prints, she knew too. This story is the absolute truth, so help me, and I will never forget it. My family has been living in the Appalachians since the late 1700s. I don't live there currently, but I visit every year. During such a trip, my grandparents would tell me a story that their parents used to tell them as we drove up the mountains. Ever heard the tale of the Wampus Cat? They'd ask me. I'd answer no. Back in the 60s, on a night with a full moon, on a road much like this, a couple was driving their car up the hill when they heard a wail. The girlfriend was scared and cozied up to the boyfriend. "No worries, sweetie, nothing can get through this steel," the boyfriend would say to comfort her. Well, standing on top of a molehill, they saw the ugliest thing. It had the body of a mountain lion. On one end was the head of a roaring lion, and on the other end was the head of a snarling black bear. It jumped on top of the roof of their car and shredded it. The boyfriend drove away as fast as he could and managed to get away. To this day, they haven't found the Wampus Cat, and they say you can still hear its roars in these hollers to this day. I'd look up at the stone rocks in amazement as the peaks surrounding me formed into a fortress. Hopefully, we will see the Wampus Cat in all its glory. My husband and I were hiking on a little-known trail outside of Burnsville, North Carolina. When I stopped and just got a vibe, I said to my husband, "I wish we had brought the pistol," which is odd for me. We walked a bit more, and I heard a noise. Hubby says just animals. I replied, "Animals don't make metal noise," and turned and started back down the trail. Here is where the crazy comes in. On the left side of the trail, there was a man next to the creek. He said nothing, even as both of us spoke to him. His eyes were red. The pupils were red. I began walking faster. My husband is just behind me and says, "Why are you getting freaked out?" I replied, "A better question is, why is he following us?" This is the first time my husband realized the man was loping behind us, and yes, I mean to use the word loping. At this point, he passes me the car keys and tells me to make a run for the car, and he will stop the loping man. And just as suddenly as the red-eyed man appeared, he vanished. My dad told me a story about how, when he was younger, he and his friends would always go into the woods doing dumb SHT like youths do. Well, they decided to mess with him and his buddy and left them in the truck just to scare them. As my dad and his friend walked through the deep MD forests, they noticed smoke on a hill. They decided to take a look and saw up to 5 people chanting around a fire with black robes on. My dad and his friend booked through the woods, finally finding their friends, who realized they were shook and said we were going to come back. My dad responded, "You don't understand what we just saw over that hill. I've heard about this, and apparently there are quite a few satanic cults in the woods. I always wondered why, when I was younger, we never went camping, or he would always tell me, absolutely, do not go into these woods at night. I always thought he was just being an overprotective parent, but now I know why." This happened in the South Appalachian Mountain Range. This event happened in 2011 around November. I remember it being 11 p.m. I had just let my dog outside to do her business outside. My dad and I were in his room messing around when we heard my dog barking. For reference, my dog never barks. When I say never barks, I mean never barks. I had her for about 6 years when the story takes place, and my dad and I assumed she was just a mute dog, and she has yet to bark to this day. Anyway, my dad had told me to let her in, and when I opened the door, I was met with something. I have no idea what it was. Whatever it was at the foot of my porch, I couldn't make out any facial or physical features. The only thing I could make out were its eyes. They were massive, about the size of my fist, and they were glowing red, about the same as a tail light on a car. I felt the blood run to my feet. I called my dog, and she ran around the thing while I remained in locked eye contact. When the dog was inside, I locked the door and ran to my room. Ever since then, I have basically had a phobia of opening my door at night without fearing that thing would be back. I told this story to a close friend about Halloween in 2019, and they looked terrified by the end of it. When I asked him why he looked so scared, he told me he had heard a similar story from a friend's mom, and she has always lived in the same area as me. I am from Virginia and currently live on the border of Virginia and West Virginia. My entire life, I have experienced the paranormal. From dealing with ghosts and shadow people at a security job to dealing with an inhuman being at a retail job, I have seen it all. But lately, I am experiencing something new. Being from the mountains, I have been aware of ain'ts, boogans, and, of course, the fair folk. Thankfully, I have never had to deal with the latter until now. As of late, I have started hearing small sing-song voices crying outside, have seen flashes of silver, and have noticed small knickknacks and collectibles disappearing and reappearing. I keep a broom at the front and back doors, circle my house with salt, use oil on every door frame, and have a cross or religious symbol in every room. Judaic Christian upbringing. Oh, BTW, we literally live right next to a giant sinkhole that my neighbor has heard growling from before. I used to live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I lived on Wind Ridge, at the edge of the city and at the foot of Signal Mountain. I woke up one night to use the bathroom and opened my bedroom door. There was a hobgoblin standing there, facing me. Its skin was grayish-green, and it had long fingers with really knobby joints. It had clothes on, like a dark suit and a grayish hat. The clothes were really worn and tattered. It had a long, pointy nose and a weird grin on its face. It also had breathing problems because it made sort of a wheezing noise when it breathed. I freaked out. Without even thinking about it, I yelled at it to get out and banished it from coming back. I can't believe I didn't wet my pants. I never saw the damn thing again. I grew up in the heart of Appalachia, at the head of a holler, surrounded by my mom's extended family. The land has been passed down in the family for 7 generations and has seen quite a few deaths in its time, as most families would rather spend their last few moments on earth at home. This is normal for most Appalachian clans, but what is not normal is that the women in my family can see and connect with those that have passed on. These people never really leave. I know it sounds crazy, but I vividly remember my great-grandmother, who died 3 weeks after I was born. She used to take naps with me and comfort me. I can tell you her favorite color, what she was thinking when she died, in my house, yes, I asked her, and secrets she had with my mother. There was another spirit that lived in my house. A young girl was in my bathroom once. I screamed when I saw her, and when my mom came running from the laundry room, she saw her too. After my mom threw the bleach she was carrying at her, the girl disappeared. We think this could have been my great-great-aunt's sister who died in my driveway, but no one knows for sure. We didn't see her again after this. My cousin's 5-year-old daughter keeps asking about the little girl that lives in the driveway. That's not the only thing weird about my home. I can also tell you when someone dies. When my great-uncle passed, I knew it when I was at home, 5 houses away, eating lunch. I could feel it. This happens every time someone passes away. I feel it before I'm told about it. I swear there is something in the mountains or the land. It can't just be me that's noticed it. My grandma lives in the same neighborhood. I live somewhat close to the Appalachians. And the hood is shaped like a loop. I was walking on a road, and there was a field on my left. In the field on my left, I see a deer. Now, I see deer all the time, so I'm like, dude, what's up? And after I said it, I felt really uncomfortable. I start to look at the deer more closely, and I notice the feet look almost like fists covered in mud. Now I tried to reason, it rained a day or two ago, it's just mud, but after it took a step, it really didn't look like hooves covered in mud. So I start to feel a really primal run deep inside me. So I start to walk, and I make it probably 20 to 30 feet, and I turn around to see the deer following me. Then everything in my head just started saying run, so I booked it. Now keep in mind that I have earbuds in while listening to music, and I had it loud so I couldn't hear a lot outside the music. So as I'm running, I start to hear the sound of hooves on the pavement. Not weird, right? Well, after a second, it slowly transitions to the sound of bare feet running on pavement. I make it almost to my house, but not quite, and I stop probably 20 feet past a street lamp, and the thing I see under it is neither human nor deer. It looked like a deer, but was all broken and reshaped into a deer, hunched over, standing on its back 2 legs. I can't even describe the face. I don't want to. Once I see what's chasing me, I'm practically frozen in place until I hear my mom say, "My name, what's going on?" And I turn away and run, not hearing anything chase me. I make it home and just say nothing and sit down. I think the thing might have been a Wendigo, but I honestly have no clue. I was driving a few nights ago, right next to the cemetery near my house. As I was passing it, I noticed someone in an all-black morph suit running right in front of someone's car. Somehow, the figure made it past without the other car even noticing, and I ended up slamming on my brakes to avoid him. He quickly runs across the road, vanishing into thin air right when he reaches the entrance of the cemetery. And it wasn't like he hid behind something. He was just there, and then he wasn't. Straight up disappeared right before my eyes. I've never been religious, and I've always been critical of whether ghosts or spirits actually exist. I never thought I would experience something that would make me believe it. It was honestly a terrifying experience, and I was just asking to see if anyone could possibly identify this type of creature, I guess. This was definitely not a figment of my imagination, as I saw the thing being lit up by both mine and the other car's headlights. Is this possibly a bad omen, or was it just a weird experience? I feel like it's also good to note that I live within a valley or forest within the Appalachian Mountains. I am 16 years old and male, and I lived most of my life in a small town, 500 people at most, that is surrounded by a forest. In my childhood, I went with my parents and my sister to one of the entrances of the forest for a trip. Of course, the dumb child that I was biking off was far ahead of my parents, and then I saw it. It had the shape of a deer, it was pitch black with red, glowy eyes. It started to stare at me, and I did it back. We were doing it for what felt like 5 minutes, and then it ran off. I went to look where it went, but it just disappeared into thin air. Years later, this wild encounter was still bothering me, so I decided to go with a friend there. We followed a straight path, but we saw nothing, so we started to go back, and then we ducking saw it in one of the branches of the path. I saw only its back part, but my friend, who saw it first, told me that it had ducking arms. We saw it only for a split second, and immediately we ran off. Next Saturday, we are going to hunt for it. As a small child, our farm backed into the Appalachian Mountains of Western Virginia. There was a small neighborhood 20 minutes from our farm, but the rest was just woods. It was super rare to run into anyone out there, and if you did, it was usually hunters. I was 5 or 6 and was playing in the woods when something white caught my eye. I saw a man far off in the woods. It was a man with a white sheet or pillowcase tied around his head. No one else was there. Just the man standing there. He didn't seem to notice me or pay any attention to my being there. At the time, I didn't think he was a ghost or anything, it was just odd. I told my mom about it, and she said something like, "Oh, that's interesting," and I did get reminders not to talk to strangers in the woods. There was an abandoned farm about a mile or 2 into the woods with a farmhouse, barn, and some sort of mine shaft or underground storage area. Around that same time period, when I was maybe 8 or 10 years old, I went with my older sister and her friends. We climbed into the loft of the barn, and she was showing her friends where she came with boys to make out. I looked from the lofty part of the barn where they toss hay out towards the abandoned house, and there was someone in the window. They had a white sheet tied around their heads. But this person looked like the sheet was tied over a box on their head. The head of the sheet was square-shaped this time. He was standing in the window. If his face wasn't covered by the sheet, I'd say he was staring at me, or at least in my direction. I was spooked, but I'm not sure why I wasn't terrified by it at the time. It may have been my age or the fact that I wanted to be cool around my older sister. Thinking back at both of those separate instances, it freaks me out. I'm in my 30s now, and I really can't explain it. Appalachia. Blue Ridge Range, the Fae, the Cherokee, and the little girl who knows them. I used to see green lights in the forest across from my childhood home. It was a vacant lot, about 2 acres full of that famous Appalachian kudzu, laurel, and rhododendron. I liked to be there. It felt like a magic world to my 8-year-old self. My younger brother and I built a fort in those woods. We were surrounded by them, after all. These glowing green orbs would flicker and dance around me. I never thought it out of the ordinary. I had and have a great imagination, although I am now quicker to deduce facts from fantasies. Well, one day they began excavation to build a home there. That evening, a sprightly little glow entered my cracked bay window and into my bedroom. Its glow woke me from my sleep, and it asked if it could stay with me. Of course. If you don't have a home now, you could stay here, I said. It left with a wisp, and from that day on, I never felt much different. I did, although I felt as if it were a force greater than you or me at play. The following late afternoon, my father had shuttled my brother and me from our school day. There was a commotion coming from the road nearest our street. Flutes, drums, and singing in words I am not equipped to relay. The street was lined with cars. We could not pull as much into our driveway. It was a Cherokee funerary procession. There were hundreds of native bodies found while excavating, and this is not how the indigenous people in my area disposed of the dead. They were at all times to be placed in mounds of layered silt sand and dirt sediments of varying density and of thatched vine that would create an earthen bubble for them to reside eternally. Placed among them often were earthenware vessels and beads. Now I am unsure of the orange orb. I felt I needed to not even speak of its presence. I am inclined to observe that I was not fond of its energy, as it tested alone among the green orbs I had grown fond of. But it was there. I do not know what it all means. But I do know one thing: mind where it is you step among the laurels. As the Fae treads the land as we do. So one day, I was hiking. This particular day was very nice, the weather was good, and I hadn't seen a lot of people. At one point, about 10 feet off my trail, I could see where I was going parallel to the same trail as it turned and snaked back about a mile ahead. I hope that makes sense, lol. I noticed that, by that section of trail, there was a fallen tree with 3 people sitting on it, a man, a woman, and a boy. This by itself wouldn't have been unusual, as it is one of the most popular trails in this area. The problem was that they were sitting completely still and completely silent. Their backs were to me, and they seemed to be staring straight ahead. It was almost as if they were entranced. I was very unsettled, as this is obviously unusual behavior. I kept walking. But being as unsettled by it as I was, I looked back and was startled to find that they were gone. I stopped in my tracks, listening but hearing nothing. I'll tell you why this startled me. Any outdoorsman will tell you that sound travels in the woods. Sound becomes entrapped by the canopy and funneled through the trees. If somebody steps 100 feet away, you're likely to hear it. And I, having been raised in the woods, have ears attuned to such sounds. Yet, those 3 people were able to move without me hearing a thing. I dismissed it. Maybe my mind was preoccupied, and I just hadn't heard them. So I turned back around to keep walking. And ahead of me, on my section of trail, there they were. With their backs to me, I saw them silently walk away over a hill. I never saw them again. So now, not only had I failed to hear them, I'd failed to see them walk past me. And I don't know how. I immediately called up my friend. I told him the children of the corn were out at Swayback and kept him on the phone so he could send help if he heard me get hit by a pitchfork or something. There's a possibility that I'm remembering details inaccurately, and what happened in reality might have been much less uncanny, but this experience bugs me to this day. Honestly, just being out in the woods, miles from any other home, a mile from an actual road, with no stores, street lights, or lit buildings last fall, I went camping for a weekend mapping field camp. The area where camp was set up was about half a mile from the cabin. That was the base area where we met up and ate, which was the only place that had electricity and only a few lights inside the cabin. Walking back to my camp after dinner, it's so dark around me, even with a headlamp and a flashlight in my hand, it didn't stop the complete blackness. My lights would shine on trees as I walked, making shadows move that felt like things were following me. Nothing was there, but it's really unnerving to be alone in the woods in such darkness. Camping alone in Dolly Sods, it must have been like 2 a.m. I could not sleep. The woods had been super loud, insects, birds, rodents, and bigger things, I suppose, and the wind was very loud too. Anyway, at some point everything went quiet, the wind went quiet, the animals too, and nothing moved. And I had goosebumps all over. It was probably nothing, but it felt absolutely terrifying in my tent, and I didn't dare look. I know it was probably nothing, but it felt uncanny, for sure. I was driving back to Franklin County, Pennsylvania, from South Bend, Indiana, for winter break. I like to take the back roads instead of the turnpike, so I was on Route 641 going over Blue Mountain, near the Huntington-Franklin border. It has a few hairpin turns on it, so I probably shouldn't have been driving it at night, but whatever. I got to the highest hairpin turn, and as soon as I started descending the mountain, a man appeared on the shoulder out of nowhere. I swerved to avoid him, thankfully avoiding going off the mountain. The guy gave me a look, and I booked it out of there. I have no idea why this man was walking along the shoulder of a road like that in mid-December, but he was. Really weird experience. I grew up in Big Canoe, Georgia. My sister and I had to ride our bikes a couple miles, mostly downhill to the Jeep Trail, to get to the swim club each day in the summer. Over the years, we have had many bear encounters. Black bears are shy but quite intimidating when the only thing between you and them is a husky bike. One particular day, as we walked our bikes up one of the few hills we had to cross, we were very far away from slow, quiet footsteps in the woods. To this day, I am convinced it was a mountain lion or cougar following us. We never saw it, but some of the sounds it made sent chills down our spines. The forest got so quiet at one point that even the birds went silent. We made it to the top of the hill and pedaled as hard as we could to the safety of the clubhouse. We were so freaked out about it that we skipped the pool for the rest of the week that summer. The Wampus cat here in my area of East Tennessee, it's most commonly described as an abnormally large, solid black panther, or painter. I've also heard that it's a spirit creature connected to the Cherokee people. There isn't supposed to be any such thing as a black panther, especially in Appalachia, but my boyfriend's father swore until the day he died that he and a friend came across one on Jellicoe Mountain in the early 1960s. I live near the Appalachian Mountains, which honestly makes this more disturbing. I'm a pretty avid runner. I've been quitting a lot of bad habits, and exercise just is the trick for me. I have a greenway behind my house where I can go on runs or bike rides. It's very beautiful, and during the day, plenty of people are there. Well, about a week ago, I ran through the greenway to stop by a friend's house and grab something. By the time I got back onto the greenway, the sun was already starting to set, and the path was getting dark. As I was walking back through the path, I had my flashlight on and kept looking around me. I felt paranoid being alone in the dark. As I was walking, I distinctly remember hearing my grandma's voice call my name into the tree line. It sounded so real and normal that I turned around instantly, only to immediately go cold, realizing that my grandma was ducking dead. This freaked me the duck out, but I tried my best to somewhat convince myself that I was just hallucinating because I was paranoid. Only about a minute later, I turned around behind me with my flashlight out of fear. And that's when I ducking saw it. It looked like a gray blob. Pretty much just like a human sprinting at you full speed in the pitch black. I screamed like a little shit, and I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. When I got home, I tried to laugh it off as me seeing shit and being a little shit. But, about a week later, and I can't stop thinking about it. It sounded so real, I heard her voice as clear as day. And the person chasing me looked so real. I've heard all those stories about skinwalkers, and while I doubt their existence, my experience was so similar to that of skinwalker encounters that I'm seriously questioning myself. Last night, I woke up to my dogs barking. As usual, I let them go outside to do their thing. When I open my bedroom door, I step out into the hallway and immediately slip onto the floor. One of my dogs has been literally shitting everywhere, running around the house barking, otherwise raising hell. I get up and get to the door to let them out, and I turn back afterward towards the closet to get some cleaning supplies. I clean it up and get everything sorted back in the closet. I then let my dogs back inside the house. At this point, nothing too strange has happened. So I go and open the door to let the dogs in, and two come in right away. Charlie, the shitting dog, stays out near the perimeter of his electric fence, barking in the dark. I close the door and go into the bathroom to clean myself up. I take off clothes, shower, and then take the clothes, really old, so garbage, basically, and set them right outside the back door. When I do this, my third dog comes back inside quickly. Still, at this point, nothing is wrong or out of order. I take a towel to a few spots around the house to get all the fecal matter. I decided to throw out the towel along with my pajamas. So I take the towel and head towards and out of the back door. I grab the stuff I'm throwing out all together in a small basket and head towards the trash bin. Yes, this is where it gets really weird. As I walk, I do notice it's pitch black outside, and no light from inside has been shining since I had been asleep. I think as soon as I consider how dark it is, I hear whistling. As soon as I hear the whistle, I hear Charlie inside the house barking. I stop to consider what it is, a bird, maybe. But it's obviously not. The whistle goes up and down in pitch with fluidity and stops at certain pitches. There is no rhyme or pattern to it. I stopped walking as soon as I heard the whistle. As I said before, I don't believe in monsters, demons, or anything like that. I do believe that there are certainly sick humans. I listened for another 5 seconds, maybe, before dropping the basket and briskly walking back inside, locking the door for good measure. I live in central NC. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? I live in the Appalachian Mountains region of the United States. Being in these ancient mountains has always inspired a sense of awe in me, and I don't think I would have wanted to grow up anywhere else. And also, being a descendant of Cherokee, it has always felt right to be here, you know? My brothers and I always had a lot of land to explore and run around on. I always tell people that I'm a grew up in the woods type of guy. It felt important to share that little background information, because what I saw when I was younger might be rooted in some local folklore or something. But anyway, on to the story. When I was younger, I was never afraid to roam the hills or back in the woods, day or night, it was just part of me. And one evening, my family had a get-together with friends and family. We had a small fire and roasted hot dogs and s'mores. All the campfire goodies, you know? Well, afterward, once the fire was put out, my father asked me to take the remaining wood, sticks, etc., that wasn't used to fuel the fire and throw them back in the brush at the end of our backyard, way at the back of the field. He didn't want to run over any sticks when mowing the lawn, apparently. So I picked them all up and headed back towards the end of the field, and by the time I got there, it was twilight. Beautiful red/orange sky, a nice glow all around. And I remember this because of just how eerie it seemed. As I threw the sticks into the brush, I turned around, and not 50 feet from me was a deep, royal blue pig. I was shocked and didn't even move. The entire scene was just amazing and scary at the same time. It didn't move, and having had pigs myself, I know that this one was definitely larger than any pig we ever had. This continued for what seemed like an hour, but realistically, we stared at each other for a good 5 minutes before he calmly turned and walked majestically into the forest. I never saw him again after that. My mom's friend had just moved with her husband to a large piece of land in eastern West Virginia. I know that they planned to use part of the land as a farm and that most of it was heavy woods, but I'm not sure whether the property was in the Appalachians or in a holler. She said that the first weekend they moved in, her husband was gone, and it was full darkness. She was standing at her kitchen sink, washing dishes, when something caught her eye. She thought she saw 2 headlights off in the tree line, very close to the yard. She knew there was no way a vehicle could be back there, but she thought maybe it was a reflection and her husband had come home. Then she realized that the yellow lights were about 8 feet off the ground. As she kept looking, she realized she was seeing eyes. I don't remember how she figured that out. She had lived in rural areas her whole life and was an avid enough hunter that I trusted her when she told me it was not any type of animal that belonged in the West Virginia woods. She figured maybe it was some type of spook light or something. After she and her husband went to bed, she said they were woken up by screaming or howling that sounded like it was coming from their roof. Her husband ran outside with a shotgun while the noise continued for a whole 2 minutes. She said it sounded sort of halfway between a mountain lion and a wolf, but almost deafeningly loud. When her husband came back inside, he said he had walked around the house and looked back a ways into the trees but hadn't seen anything. She also mentioned how the regular critter sounds had stopped when she saw what she thought were eyes. She never learned what it was, and I don't know whether anything else happened with it, but this would have been in the early to mid-90s. When I was a kid, in my early preteens, I was a little timid. We lived in a mobile home in rural Appalachia, and whenever I would hear my stepdad wake up and make breakfast in the wee hours of the morning, I would creep out of my bedroom and scurry across the house so that I could climb in bed with my mom. On this particular morning, around 3:30 a.m. or so, my mom had gotten up with my stepdad. She told me to go climb in bed, she would be there a little bit later. I did. I'm not sure how much time has passed, but something woke me up. It was still dark. Something just felt weird. When I tried to open my eyes, a little girl stood by me at the edge of the bed. Her face was obscured by dark, dirty, almost singed-looking hair. She wore what looked like a feetsack dress. I rubbed my eyes, but the little girl was still there. I rolled over and turned back around, and then she was gone. It was a little odd that I didn't freak out because, at that age, I was scared of my own shadow, but I decided that it was just a weird dream, and I went back to bed. When I woke up later that morning, I told my mom. She would typically tell me what any mother tells their child when they have a nightmare, but she didn't. Instead of reassuring me that it was just a bad dream, she grew silent. I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't ask any more questions until a pastor showed up at our house the next day. The old man had the posture of a candy cane, and I thought he was never going to manage as he struggled to hang prayer clothes above the doors. I knew something was up. My mom was not particularly religious. After the elderly gentleman left, I pressed my mom harder. She revealed that my stepdad had been seeing the same thing for weeks. She also told me that, through some research, my aunt and grandma had discovered that the place where our home sat was the location of a hay barn fire in the 1930s or 1940s. The fire was presumably started by a little girl, who would have been the same age as the apparition I encountered, and her younger brother. They both perished in the fire. The area had been a coal camp, typically places full of tragedy and destitution, during the early and mid-1900s. The visits stopped. I'm not sure why. I didn't feel that whatever I was seeing was particularly malicious, and I think that's the reason I didn't feel scared. However, later that year, my stepdad went ginseng hunting several miles from our house, and he happened upon a grove of vegetation. He said that he could tell that there was something underneath all of the plants, so he cleared it off, only to find the little girl and boy's grave. My best friend and I were camping at a spot in East Tennessee along the Appalachian Trail last summer. We were only getting away for one night and were set up very close to the trailhead and parking lot. When we arrived, there was only one other car in the parking lot, and before sunset, we watched hikers return to that car and leave. As it got dark, some strange things began to happen. We heard what sounded like footsteps along a side trail that ran by our campsite, leaves crunching, twigs snapping under weight, and such. We do a lot of hiking and camping and are used to hearing unseen noises, so we didn't think too much of it. And then everything just got quiet. The woods had been loud, insects, frogs, and even a dog somewhere in the mountains had been making noise. It all stopped instantaneously as we were sitting around the fire. That's when we both saw a light swaying back and forth along the main trail. We looked at each other and said, "Did you just see that?" In unison. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like a glowing ball without any radiance, like a street lamp may look without the glow surrounding it. It bobbed back and forth, following the trail into the woods, then circled around, came back towards our campsite, and finally turned around again and trailed off into the woods. It moved as if someone were carrying it, like a lantern or a headlamp on a somewhat short person. We immediately decided to check it out, heading up to the trail with our flashlights, thinking someone was playing a trick on us or hiking into the trail after dark, which would have been unheard of. These mountains are literally pitch black at night, and that would be asking for injury. The trail was deserted as far as we could see. We walked to the parking lot to see if any other vehicles had pulled in. No cars were there except my own, and every interior light was on even though the doors were locked. We packed up and left immediately. East Tennessee is known for its ghost stories and storytelling in general, as is common in Appalachian culture. The Cherokee felt connected to the region spiritually, and the Europeans that replaced them have too. So here's my own set of stories, all in relation to Johnson City, as I am originally from that area. In college, before any of my friend groups could drink, we got wild hair and decided to go ghost bustin', as we called it. This usually involved us loading up in a vehicle and cruising through the hollows and hills of East Tennessee. This one's near Irwin, it's called Bumpass Cove. From what I can remember, there were several stories about this place, including a Confederate cemetery with ghosts. We could never find it, and the GPS kept taking us to a house, those poor people. We did, however, find a family cemetery with a paved road around it. Legend had it that if you drove around this cemetery on a full moon 3 times, a ghost jeep would chase you down the mountain. This cemetery was very isolated and near the Cherokee National Forest. I don't think we ever managed to do this on a full moon. We still got scared, though. Since the cemetery sat on a hill, we would see the illuminated crosses poking up around the graves. Under a night sky, this is horrifying to see. The second one is of the Job Cemetery in downtown Irwin. The cemetery is located in town but sinks down into a creek and heavily forested area. I believe at the back end there is a large, or was once a large, railroad yard. Well, legend has it that the ghost of a murderous hobo who apparently was killed in a brawl in Irwin haunts the cemetery. We explored the cemetery numerous times but never saw much again. It was very creepy and unsettling to go back down into the back of the cemetery, so close yet so far away from the living world. A couple of friends and I were hiking in the woods near our school a couple of months ago. We knew that this particular area of the forest was a little bit strange. We discovered that once you enter it through this small trail, any noise from the outside world simply stops. There aren't even birds or bugs. Sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you can hear drums from the river. If you look between the trees or far enough ahead of you on the trail, it's completely pitch black, as if it hasn't fully loaded yet, for lack of a better word. On the sides of the path, there's a strange blue mossy substance. There's so much more that I could say about the area itself, but I'd like to keep this somewhat short for the sake of not going on a complete ramble. One day, we were doing our thing, just walking, trying to scare ourselves. I was a bit spooked, so when I started to feel like I was being watched, I wasn't surprised, and I chalked it up to nerves. I turned around and saw a tall creature on the trail. It had to be about 6 feet tall, and it had 4 long, spiny legs that tapered to a sharp point. It had no head or neck, but it had a bump where one would be. It had no features or patterns, and it was very thin. It wasn't at all humanoid, it was almost more like a headless deer. It was a deep midnight black. That was the strangest thing about it. It reflected absolutely no sunlight, almost as if someone had digitally edited it to be a completely solid color. It was in motion when I saw it, slowly walking to the opposite side of the trail and into the woods. I guess walking is a loose term, I'm not entirely sure how it was moving. It definitely was moving, and my brain immediately recognized that it was walking, but now that I think about it, I'm not sure its legs were moving. Looking at it felt wrong, like I had walked into someone else's territory. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. At first, I assumed I was seeing things and freaked myself out too much. Then one of my friends asked if anyone else saw it, and that thought was quickly disproved. I've seen a couple more of them in those woods since then, but none of them were quite the same as the first one. I decided to call them the dogs simply so that I wouldn't have to say the weird tall forest duckers when trying to describe them. If it makes a difference, this all happened in Appalachian, North Carolina. Does anyone know what they could be? I live in Mississippi, which is home to the majority of the Natchez Trace. The Trace is a 440-mile-long highway between Nashville and Natchez that runs parallel to a Native American trade route used by southeastern Native American tribes. During the 1700s and 1800s, it was one of the most influential and dangerous trade routes in the southeast due to its connection with the eastern states and the MS River. Now, it's a protected state park or roadway system, think Appalachian Trail. It's not a preferred route for travel since it's 2 lanes with speeds only up to 55 miles per hour, and there has been occasional crime due to its remoteness and lack of authorities. But it's really pretty when you're driving, for the heck of it. 25 years ago, we lived in North Mississippi, but the rest of our families lived in South Mississippi. It just so happened that a small part of the trip went along the Trace. My mom did a lot of these trips by herself with 3 kids, only 5 years between the oldest and youngest. Most of the drive feels normal and safe. However, there's one area that makes me nervous at 10 and makes me nervous at 30. It's called the Witch Dance. Witch Dance is a walking/biking trail around 230 miles from Natchez. The legend says that there are patches of burnt or brown earth that will never grow in that area due to witches dancing in the trees. It's probably a made-up story, but there are random patches of brown grass, no matter the season. It never grows. And, 26 years after I first drove past the stop, I still get a cold feeling down my back when I imagine turning back to the trees there. It just never sat right with me. I don't like it. My friend and I were hiking in Blue Ridge, Georgia. We were just going camping for one day. And the trail was part of the Appalachian Trail near the very start of it. My friend told me a story about one of his friends. And he said that he heard voices and footsteps at night near Blood Mountain. And he had to hike at night because the noises were so intense. So back to the main story, we found a campsite and set up shop. As it got darker, we got a bad feeling. It seemed like something was watching us. Then it started, and we saw a pair of glowing eyes about 100 to 150 feet away from our fire. Then my friend goes to dunk his head in the creek near our tent. And he claims something pushed him into the water. His shirt was soaked, and he hit his nose on a rock and was bleeding. Then after that, we heard a woman's voice. We couldn't really make out the words. We heard it in front of us, behind us, and to the left of us over the creek. It could have been a night hike, but to the left, there was no trail. And the night hikers weren't using a flashlight if they were there. We also heard footsteps around us and sticks snapping. We finally got in the tent and tried to sleep. My friend fell asleep before me. And I heard twigs snapping right next to my head outside of the tent. And that's pretty much it. Very, very creepy. If you decide to go camping in Blue Ridge, just know there's things out there lurking at night. 2 days before the Dragon's Tooth, I lost my spoon while bushwhacking off trail. Stainless steel, 25c at Goodwill, no big deal, but a spoon. I carved myself a set of chopsticks. They did a better job getting into the corners of the tuna packets, even. The next day, I was trying to get to the tooth in time for sunset. It was too slow, though, and I was starting to lose the trail in the darkness when a clearly established campsite showed up on the right. Cowboy camp, protein bar with butter, sleep. I'm awake with morning light, pulling up camp, and 6 inches from where my head lay, half buried in leaves and dirt, is a spoon, stainless steel, 25c at Goodwill. No big deal, but I still have that spoon. The trail provides. I grew up near Lake Lanier in North Georgia. They flooded a valley to make the lake. We always heard about a boy whose parents didn't want him. So you chained him to a bed when the valley was flooded and left him there to drown. If you went into the water at night, he would pull you under to stay with him forever. I was hiking with my girlfriend over the weekend on a decently popular trail in the Appalachian Mountains. There was a thunderstorm coming in as we were hiking, so we decided to turn around, which was a good choice because lightning started right as we were getting off the trail. The entire way down the mountain, I was worried about getting caught in the storm, but I had another feeling like I was being stalked by an animal. The woods were extremely quiet, but I thought it was probably due to the storm. I remember feeling like I couldn't walk fast enough, and I kept turning around, half expecting something to be looking at me in the distance. It felt like there was something there, about 60 to 80 feet away from me at all times. When I got back to my car, I still didn't feel entirely safe until I was out of the parking lot. Does this have a paranormal explanation, or was it an animal or something? I'm from far SWVA, and one day I was driving down a gravel road just riding around when I came up on a group of 10 plus people in white robes. They were walking down the road towards the creek. I put it in reverse and got out of there pretty quick, but in hindsight, I'm pretty sure it was just people performing a baptism down by the creek. I have recently moved onto family land and decided to explore some of the property that we own, Appalachian Mountains/hill terrain, just in case you were wondering. Anyway, the area I decided to explore starts at the bottom of this hill. We have a gate and road for the old house seat, so I essentially have to walk up a steep as hell portion until it gets to where a coal company has worked on some of the top, flattening it out. So being by myself, I had a radio linked to one at the house, a backpack full of water, an AK, and my Glock for protection, because I can, as well as hearing protection that also amplifies sounds a bit, listen to anything moving close to me. So just as I am about to get to the flat top, I thought I had heard a female? Or maybe even a child say a quick word, and naturally I stopped and looked around, but I heard nothing after I stopped. Once I had made it to the flat area at the main top, which was very beautiful, I might add, I heard the voice again. It was almost like something or someone was watching me and messing with me once I got up there, and I had a feeling of uneasiness build up. It only seemed to have been around where the job site met the tree line, because once I was out in the fields, it was very peaceful, and I didn't feel as anxious. It wasn't a shout, nor did it seem distant. It sounded as if someone or something was right next to me when it happened. I was in the 6th grade when I had my first real encounter with a supernatural creature from Appalachia. I live on a small off-road in the middle of the woods. Only about 13 give or take houses are on my road, so it's quiet at night. When I was a child in Appalachia, I was taught things to avoid any supernatural confrontation, but it was bound to happen one day. Some rules that I learned were, never be out alone after dark. If you see it, no, you didn't. If you hear it, no, you didn't. Things along those lines. It was January, and I had gone over to my friend's house, which was about 3 houses away from mine, so not far. But it was winter, the sun goes down early, and I had lost track of time. It was 6 o'clock and pitch dark outside. When we realized how dark it was already, she offered for me to just sleep over since she knew there was a possibility of me running into a supernatural creature. But I insisted, so I just walked home. She then offered to walk me home so I wouldn't be alone. Again, I said no. So I went outside into the frigid, icy air and walked home. I had my phone flashlight on so I could see a creature from far away in an emergency. I walked home as normal, looking at the beautiful icicles and snow piles everywhere, and thought I'll be fine. I was wrong. My driveway to get down to my front door is steep and goes down fast, and at the end are the woods. It's been in the woods for at least 5 miles. I walked down slowly since there was ice everywhere, and then I heard rustling in the bushes at the bottom of the driveway in the woods. I pointed my flash down, and I saw a wolf, but it didn't look normal. Living in the Northeast, I see many wolves, but this one looked demented. Wolves won't strike at you or run up to you unless you provoke them, so I thought it would all be okay. I was about halfway down my driveway, and every step I took, the wolf looked more and more demented. It had glowing eyes, and it was very big to just be a wolf. At that time, it started moving towards me quickly. Another rule I learned as a kid was to never run from one of those creatures. But I did run. My front door was locked, but I had a key in my hand. It took me what felt like forever to unlock the key as it jiggled in the keyhole. My anxiety was so bad, and even though it was 20 degrees out, I was sweating like crazy. Finally, the door was unlocked, and I ran in. There is a window right next to my front door, and I looked out the door, and there it was. A skinwalker shapeshifted into a wolf. Its eyes were beady and cold, it was hungry. I looked away, scared of what would happen next. After about a minute, it was gone, never to be seen again. Every night for about 2 months after that, I was spooked enough to even close my eyes to sleep. It got so bad that I had to start taking melatonin. I'm mostly fine now, but here and there, I still feel like this wolf is watching me. It still spooks me to this day. My boyfriend, my dog, and I were camping along the river. We were kayaking. We had gotten done kayaking for the day and were relaxing at our campsite before dinner. Our site was only like 10 feet from the trail, and the river was right beyond that. We had had some swims and other dramatic and stressful events while kayaking that day and needed to unwind and relax. We were running low on weed, so we had just eaten some edibles because we are stoners, and why not? My boyfriend was half asleep in his hammock that was at the river's edge, and I was lying on a towel near the tent when a man came walking up to us, blabbing about giving us his trash. I was at first confused, but he was wearing a backpack and a knit shirt, so I quickly realized he was a serious hiker on the trail and wanted us to take his trash for him, which is a pretty reasonable request. However, we were only a 5-minute walk down the trail, and there was basic civilization, including a dumpster and whatnot, literally 5 minutes down the trail. I told him this because I'm sure he would rather just put it in the bin himself in that case, but he then pulled out a large bag of weed and said I could have some if I took his trash. I was a little confused but would never turn down free weed, so I was like, sure, whatever, we will throw out your trash for you. He gave me a small handful of nugs and threw his trash into our bag, and I asked him some small stuff like, oh, are you through hiking? And whatever basic stuff. He said he was and had been for a couple months and asked if he could stay and drink a beer, and I was like, sure, this guy seems like he really just needs to talk to some people or something, and I wasn't doing anything, and he seemed normal enough, so why not? I did think he might have only been there because I looked like a girl who was alone if he hadn't noticed the hammock, but I thought at most he would be mildly disappointed he couldn't hit on me or whatever. My boyfriend popped his head up at some point, and the hiker did seem surprised to see him, which confirmed that he thought I was alone. He kept saying stuff like, oh, don't worry, I'm not one of those creepy people. Like, okay, dude, I hope not. I was trying to be friendly and just ask some basic questions or about trail stories, and the guy was answering normally enough. My boyfriend and I decided to smoke some weed in the style of GBs out of the river and, of course, offered the guy some because he had given us the weed in the first place. He hits it and coughs a bunch, and that's when stuff gets weird. As stoners, we were used to seeing people get too high and act a little weird, but this guy was being incredibly strange. He talked and talked and talked, but it was so quiet that we couldn't really hear a thing he said. I tried to seem interested and respond to stuff, but I had no clue what he was saying. He was just staring at the river, talking to himself, and then occasionally looking at us like we were part of the conversation, and we'd be like, oh, right, ha. It was so strange and confusing. He also drank like 3 beers and 2 cigarettes during the time, so it was not a short amount of time. This man would not leave. He started talking to Siri on his phone when we stopped answering him, and he was like yelling at Siri, calling her a witch. At one point, out of nowhere, he goes, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I seem like a serial killer? My boyfriend and I looked at each other like we had both just had the same thought, that this guy had just gotten way too creepy. We both nervously laughed and said, oh, 1, meaning not at all, for sure, and tried to act casual like it was definitely a joke or something, but we were both thinking, WTF? After that, I said, nope, this guy is not welcome here, and I got in the hammock, as did my boyfriend, and we kind of sat there talking to each other a bit and not really acknowledging the guy. He had said he was going to smoke one more cigarette and then leave, and I swear that was the longest cigarette I have ever witnessed in my life. It took him so long to finish it, and I was just watching it get shorter and shorter, hoping he would just leave already. He finally got up, put his stuff on, and left, but it was almost dark, so we knew he would not go far before setting up camp for the night too. That night, we thought for sure this guy would come back and kill us. Throughout the night, people did walk by on the trail multiple times, but it was other people we had seen on the trail during the day, a couple that seemed to be on drugs and maybe lived up the trail. We literally planned what we would do if he came back, which was grab the dog, jump in the river, and float to the boat ramp downstream. Anyway, he didn't end up showing up that night, and we didn't see him again, but it was enough to freak us out. And I am definitely glad I wasn't alone when he walked up. This happened about 3 years ago, 2016-2017-ish, when some friends and I went hiking on the Appalachian Trail in North Carolina, close to Boone, but still a good 30-minute drive from the start of the trail. We get in a few hours before we start to make camp, so we can beat the time and enjoy the mountain scenery at dusk before it gets dark. We set up, tie our food and things in the tree, roll a joint, crack open a few, and enjoy the mountain face overlooking the valley. Truly, the Appalachians are drop-dead gorgeous. Then we hear it. There's just this blood-curdling scream out of nowhere, and it seemed to come from our east, opposite our campground and the trail. We all immediately freaked out, with a couple of us yelling out and one or two pulling out their pistols. We all just stand frozen for a second when we hear it again, and then silence. Like that horror movie silence when everything, the trees, the birds, the wind, just stops. You could hear everyone breathing like it was against your ear. None of us had cell service, and it was too dark to make our way to anything like civilization, so the four of us just holed up together without sleeping until daybreak. Still a bit freaked out, we made our way back to our cars and the parking lots. Now the trails kind of buckled and intersected at some point in this area, so to get back, we had to come close to where we heard the origin of the scream, and lo and behold what we found in the trail, cougar tracks. We hurried back and contacted the local ranger station to let them know, and the ranger just sighed and said something to the effect of, "Yeah, you're not the first this week to tell us." So bottom line, those big cats ain't gone just yet. My grandfather has always been a superstitious man. He was born out west, in upper Arizona, off of any city limits, not far from Antelope Canyon. When he was in his teens, his family moved to southern, rural Virginia to go live and help out with the family farm. Growing up, my grandfather told me many stories about his time in the woods as a young boy. He would tell me of human-like creatures that moved on all fours, but the second you noticed it was there, it would stand up and walk on its hind legs as if it had been doing that the whole time. He told me stories of graveyards that appeared during the day but vanished at night. He also told me of creatures coming up to the house and peering in windows, watching behind trees. He would explain cattle being slain at random times of the year with no explanation. There are no bears there, and there is no way coyotes could tear apart cows in that manner. He'd tell me about hearing voices. He heard the voices of his wife, his son, and his mother coming from the woods when he was working with cattle. Although there was never anybody there, my father tells me my grandfather knows more than what he is saying, but it scares him to talk about it. He could never tell us what exactly the creatures were. Just that they were there and to never go in the woods alone. He told me he had been stalked by creatures that came in different forms his whole life. I believed all of this to be an old man's tale until recently. I am 18 now, and I am a female. I live with my parents in Midwestern North Carolina. However, I am moving to the rural North Carolina Appalachian Mountains now. I am not a religious person, but I do believe in the paranormal. I consider myself to be a spiritual person. I am interested in different energies, bonding with animals, crystals, and manifestation. Through my spiritual journey, I have only dealt with good energy. Up until recently. Last month, I was sitting in the car with a few of my friends. I had come home from college to hang out with my hometown friends. It was about 11 p.m., and we were sitting in a parking lot along the woods with the car completely off, just talking. We all went silent for a bit. Suddenly, I became overwhelmed by a sense of heaviness. I was uneasy. I scanned the tree line, and that's when I saw them. Two animals looked like dogs. They were both standing very still and looking at us. I asked my friends if they saw them too. Nobody else could see them. After 10 minutes of trying to point them out, I gave up. But the dogs kept watching. My father, mother, and I make frequent trips to the Smoky Mountains and stay in the cabins they have near Pigeon Forge. However, this particular trip still haunts me to this day. About 8 years ago, we stayed in a cabin that had an alarm system. It was already dark outside when we reached the cabin and settled in. We set the alarm and thought we should watch a movie together. While we were watching the movie, the security system alarm went off. The alarm was only to go off if a door was opened. We checked the cabin from top to bottom to find nothing out of the ordinary. The next morning, we called the company that rented the cabin to us to have them check out the alarm system. Someone came and checked out the system and said that he had been called out to our cabin multiple times within the past month with the same problem. Since it's only the first day at the cabin, I am already feeling a little creeped out. I noticed that there is a book on the table that guests can sign and talk about how much they love the cabin. As I was reading more and more stories, I noticed that many of them mentioned feeling unsafe, and some even mentioned that they found wet footprints on the deck where the hot tub is. I told my family about these stories, and they told me they were just trying to tell scary stories to get other guests spooked. I agree with her and go about our day. The same night, we go to bed like normal. My father slept in the basement of the cabin, I slept on the main floor beside the kitchen, and my mother slept on the top floor. My dad snores so loudly that we all sleep far away from each other, including my mom. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning when I was woken up by the fridge door closing. I looked at the bright light from the fridge that was pouring into my room from the crack underneath my closed bedroom door. I noticed that the light would come and go as the fridge door seemed to continue to open and close. I assumed it was one of my parents leaning on the fridge door, trying to decide what they wanted to eat for a late snack. However, I felt weird and didn't even consider getting out of bed to join in on the snack. The fridge light disappeared slowly, and I heard footsteps walk away from my bedroom and head in the direction of the steps to go up to my mom's room. The footsteps seemed to stop for a second, then start the trip up the stairs. All of a sudden, they stopped. I assumed that it was my mother, and she made it to her room, so I fell back asleep. The next morning, I wake up and go directly to my mom and ask what she decided to eat last night. She looked at me and asked, "What?" I told her that I thought she was at the fridge last night opening and closing the fridge because I heard her go back upstairs after a while. Around 2 a.m. she looked at me and said, "I thought that was you. At this time in my life, I was known to sleepwalk every now and then. I saw you standing at the top of the stairs last night around that time. I assumed you were sleepwalking because you looked at me and went back downstairs." So at this point, I start to freak out and become sick to my stomach. The rest of the trip, I slept with my mother on the very top floor. I didn't experience anything else the rest of the trip, and I never went anywhere alone. A couple months go by after our trip, and my dad tells me he was looking to rent another cabin for a trip. I went to look at the cabin that we rented the last time and found out that the cabin had been closed and is no longer available to rent. Out of curiosity, he did some research to find out that many guests experienced something in that cabin. The complaints ranged from feeling unsafe, to people thinking someone was in the cabin that shouldn't have been, to people leaving before their vacation was over. I am not sure what my mother and I experienced that night at the cabin, but I now know that we aren't the only ones who went through something similar. So I worked at the Appalachian Mountain Club at the base of Mount Washington for about 4 months or so about a year ago and moved up further north about 2 years ago. Ever since then, I've been terrified of the woods at night. To begin, I've believed in ghosts and whatnot since I was young, after several experiences. I would say it first began once I started working for the AMC Visitor Center, and I can verify that. If you don't believe me at all, we put sunglasses on a stuffed raccoon above the front desk and named it Chet. Those sunglasses were mine. I worked at the Black Bear Cafe, the sandwich shop, most days but occasionally got drafted for some functions that ran until 10 or so, and I was good friends with most of the teens that lived on site, so I used to loiter after hours for some time. Every once in a while, as I walked from the dorms to the main building, I would see lights up on the mountain, and I usually disregarded them as some hikers or campers and most other people did. It was a very rainy night, so I could have been hearing things or just my own paranoia, but some light seemed very close, and it bobbed up and down quickly, so I went to see if someone needed help, but it quickly went out, and I could see from my own phone light a crouched, very dark humanoid shape hunched over. I ran. Duck that noise. The next day, I asked the dishwasher, who I was very close to, and he claimed to have seen something similar, but no one else believed him as he was pretty new as well. I had about 2 months left on my work contract, so I decided to keep quiet about it. Where I live, it's around an old paper mill, and I had a close friend come up, and we decided to go for a walk in the woods across the street. It was about midnight, and being college students, we didn't care about sleep at all. The area of woods we walked in used to be a street in the early 1900s, so there's a lot of road bits, but there's one specifically that I have no better way to describe than unearthly, damn near perfectly circular and a lack of foliage around it. Again, I have no better way to describe it than called to me. I had a great opportunity to sit on this rock. I had my friend watch my back, as he had a weird feeling about it as well. About a minute in, I had gotten a splitting headache, and as much as I wanted to get off this rock, I couldn't move. I was absorbed in something else. About another minute in, I had called out to my friend to see if he saw anything, and he claimed to see a dark, hunched-over humanoid figure in one of the trees. I had to have him drag me off the rock, and we ran out of the woods. My husband and I were staying in a secluded cabin in Satay-Nakuchi, just outside of Helen, Georgia. We woke up Monday morning to the sound of someone beating on the door and yelling. I got up quickly and in a panic and went to see what was going on, but I could see the person walking away as I made my way downstairs, and when I opened the door, no one was there. There had not been a car, and the road to the cabin was long enough that I think I would have seen the person still walking away, but there was just no one there. My cabin rental said they had no one out there besides us and said to just call back if something happened like that again. We go about our day, still a little shaken, but we had a great day. We went on a hike, got some good food, and did some tourist shopping. Fast forward to this evening. We were trying to put sheets over the doors that had no curtains, and we heard some footsteps approaching behind our cabin porch. We both immediately stopped and looked over, and the sound stopped. Of course, this could have just been an animal, but it still freaked me out. Then, about 30 seconds later, I saw what looked like headlights passing by the trees behind the porch, but again, we were the only ones out there, and there was no vehicle besides my own, and the headlights were facing away from the cabin. We started watching some TV, paused our show to get a snack, and we heard something coming from outside that almost sounded like musical notes being played one by one with no organization, rhythm, or anything. It sounded both close and far away, almost like an echo, but reversed, because it sounded like it got louder the closer it echoed. This went on for about 2 to 3 minutes. I was trying to play it off as maybe some kind of animal call, but I knew that's not what it was. We started the show again and finished an episode about 30 minutes later. By this time, I had such an uneasy feeling, and my husband suggested we just go to sleep to get some rest and maybe leave in the morning. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, and we both had a feeling that we were not safe there. I called my mom hoping to get some advice, but as soon as I heard her voice, I burst into tears right away as I told her that I felt unsafe there. She immediately said you should leave as soon as you can, which was weird because she hates when I have to drive anywhere at night. Almost 2 hours later, 2:30 a.m., we finally make it back home, and I feel much better, but I'm still very shaken up. I feel like some of the myths are wild, but I can't help but wonder what the heck could have been out there, because that musical note sound we heard did not sound like it came from an animal or a human. Could it have been someone trying to scare us, or worse, someone trying to do us harm? Or could it have been a near encounter with some sort of Appalachian legend? I don't know.